That could be first gear. That could actually be first gear. It is!
Oh my god. That sounds nuts. What the?
It was well fast! Oh my god!
I hit my back.
It was well fast! It actually works.
How have you put together a gearbox that works? I'm impressed.
It literally was just, it was wheel spinning.
Yeah,
that.
The Ferrari was finally back together, but there was one problem. It was overheating so badly that the whole rebuild could have been over before the car even made its first proper drive. The engine was running. The cooling system had been rebuilt. Everything looked like it should work. But the temperature kept climbing. And when they investigated, they discovered the problem wasn't simply a radiator or a water pump. One of the cooling fans wasn't doing its job. That sounds like a small problem on a Ferrari F430. It wasn't. Because fixing that would lead to another problem, and another, until the team realized they were dealing with a car that had been fighting them at almost every level. And somehow, this wasn't even the biggest problem. The gearbox was still waiting. This Ferrari F430 had already been through a brutal restoration journey. The engine had been taken apart. The gearbox had been dismantled. Parts were scattered everywhere. Now the team had to turn all of those pieces back into a functioning Ferrari. And the first battle was keeping the engine alive. The overheating problem couldn't simply be ignored. So instead of guessing, they started working through the cooling system one component at a time. Was coolant actually circulating? Was the water pump working? Were the radiator fans coming on? Were the relays functioning? Was the temperature control system sending the right signals? Every answer mattered. Because if the coolant wasn't moving, the engine could overheat. If the fans weren't operating, the radiators couldn't remove enough heat. And if the electrical system wasn't triggering the fans correctly, the entire cooling system could appear healthy while the Ferrari slowly cooked itself. The first checks began narrowing things down. The heater was used as an indication that coolant was circulating through the system. That was important. Because it meant the problem wasn't simply a dead cooling circuit. But then they looked at the fans. And that's where things became interesting. One fan could operate. The second fan wasn't behaving properly. So they tested it directly. The fan itself could run. That meant the motor wasn't necessarily the problem. Now the question became, what was stopping the Ferrari from telling that fan to switch on? This is where the F430's cooling system became much more complicated. The fans don't simply come on whenever the engine gets warm. The system uses temperature controls to activate them at different stages. So the team started testing the relays and temperature controls. And eventually, they found the suspect. A coolant temperature switch wasn't doing what it was supposed to do. One small component had become a major obstacle in the restoration. A new switch was ordered. But there was still another issue. The thermostat. At this point, the team wasn't interested in simply getting the Ferrari to run. They needed to make sure the cooling system actually worked correctly. Because a Ferrari that starts but overheats isn't restored. It's just a problem waiting to happen. So the thermostat was replaced. The coolant system was reassembled. The system was vacuum-filled. And then came the moment they had been waiting for. They started the Ferrari again. The temperature began rising. Everyone watched. Would the second fan finally come alive? And then it did. Both cooling fans were operating correctly. The temperature stabilized. For the first time, one of the biggest mechanical threats to the project appeared to be under control. But that victory didn't last long. Because there was another part of this Ferrari that had been waiting to expose its own problem. The gearbox. And this wasn't going to be a simple fix. The F430 being restored wasn't an ordinary automatic car. It was a rare manual Ferrari. And that created a completely different problem. The manual gearbox mechanism had to be reconstructed from a collection of complicated components. Cables, bearings, arms, linkages. Small pieces that all had to work together perfectly. And because manual F430s are so rare, finding the correct parts wasn't straightforward. The project reportedly involved a rare manual gearbox linkage component and parts from specialized conversion kits. The team had to work from limited information and a single reference diagram to understand how everything should fit together. This is where the restoration became less like normal repair work, and more like solving a mechanical puzzle. One component goes in the wrong position, and the entire gear selection system can fail. One missing part can stop the project. And one damaged cable can make everything you've just assembled practically useless. But they kept going. Piece by piece, the linkage was reconstructed. The mechanism started to resemble a functioning gear selector again. It looked like progress. It felt like progress. But then they tried selecting the gears. And something was wrong. The gearbox wouldn't give them everything they expected. At first, it wasn't immediately obvious why. So they went back through the mechanism. And then they discovered it. A cable had snapped. That's the kind of failure that can make an entire restoration feel like it has gone backwards. You can rebuild the engine. You can rebuild the cooling system. You can spend hours assembling a rare gearbox linkage. But if one cable breaks, the driver still can't properly select the gears. And suddenly, the Ferrari that was almost ready to move was restricted to only certain gears. The team had another part to find. And this one wasn't cheap. The replacement gearbox cable component reportedly cost around £320. Another expense. Another delay. Another reminder that restoring a rare Ferrari isn't just about mechanical skill. It's about finding parts that may no longer be easy to obtain. And that's something people often don't see when they watch a restoration video. They see the engine being rebuilt. They see the tools. They see the finished car. But behind every successful restoration are hours of searching for parts, waiting for deliveries, checking compatibility, and sometimes discovering that the part you need simply isn't available in the normal way. And while all of this mechanical work was happening, the Ferrari still didn't look finished. The bodywork needed attention too. Freshly painted bumper components were prepared and fitted. But another problem appeared. The new paint didn't perfectly match the original Ferrari paint. And that makes sense when you're dealing with an older car. The original paint had aged. The new panels were fresh. Even if the color code was correct, the two surfaces could still look different beside each other. So now the team had another decision. Do you keep pushing toward getting the car mechanically functional? Or do you spend more time making every body panel visually perfect? And this is where restoration becomes a balance between time, money, and perfection. A project like this can keep expanding forever. There is always another panel to correct. Another piece of trim to replace. Another imperfection to fix. But at some point, you need to know whether the car can actually drive. And that moment finally arrived. The Ferrari was still far from perfect. The bodywork wasn't completely finished. The paint wasn't flawless. The interior wasn't completely assembled. The gearbox still had limitations. But the engine was running. The cooling system was stable. The major mechanical work had brought the car back from the edge. Now there was only one question left. Would it actually move? The Ferrari was started. The gear was selected. And slowly, the F430 began moving under its own power. After everything that had happened, that moment was huge. This wasn't a showroom Ferrari. It wasn't finished. It wasn't perfect. But it was alive. The team had taken a Ferrari that had started this journey with its engine and gearbox in pieces. And brought it back to the road. Even with the gearbox problem, they managed to drive the car in the available gears, including third and reverse. It might sound underwhelming compared with a fully functioning Ferrari. But after everything that had happened, it was a massive victory. Because the goal wasn't perfection in that moment. The goal was proof. Proof that the rebuild was working. Proof that the cooling system could hold temperature. Proof that the engine could run. And most importantly, proof that this rare manual F430 could move again. But there was still unfinished business. The gearbox needed to be properly repaired. The bodywork needed more attention. The paint needed to be brought together. And the Ferrari still had a long way to go before it could be called completely restored. That's what makes this story so interesting. The first drive wasn't the ending. It was the beginning of the final stage. A Ferrari that had once been reduced to an engine, gearbox, broken components, and scattered parts was now moving again. And the problems that nearly stopped the project had taught the team something important. You don't solve a complicated restoration by guessing. You solve it by following the evidence. Test the coolant. Check the fans. Test the relays. Replace the faulty switch. Rebuild the linkage. Inspect the cables. Find the broken component. Then try again. And again. Until the machine finally responds. That's what makes restoring a rare performance car so rewarding. The biggest victories aren't always the dramatic ones. Sometimes it's a cooling fan finally switching on. Sometimes it's watching the temperature stabilize. Sometimes it's finding the tiny broken component responsible for an entire gearbox problem. And sometimes, it's simply putting the car into gear and feeling it move for the first time. This F430 still wasn't perfect. But it was no longer dead. And that difference is everything. If you enjoyed this Ferrari restoration story, make sure you subscribe to Turbo Drive by hitting the subscribe button on the Turbo Drive channel and turn on notifications. Because here, we don't just look at beautiful cars. We follow the failures, the impossible repairs, the setbacks, and the moment these machines finally come back to life. And this Ferrari story isn't finished yet. The gearbox still needs to be solved. The bodywork still needs finishing. And the next time this F430 hits the road, it could finally be ready to show what it was built to do.